Did you just hit that old man? The sharp voice cut through the quiet hum of the diner like a blade. Every fork, every cup, every breath in the room froze. Morning light streamed through the wide windows, spilling across chrome counters and half-empty coffee mugs, but all that warmth seemed to vanish in an instant. Before we get started, be sure to subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories channel so you never miss these fascinating tales of courage. And let us know in the comments where you're watching today. At the corner booth sat Henry Callahan, 81 years old, a Korean War veteran who came here every morning at exactly 8:15. He wore a flannel shirt soft from years of washing and a pair of boots older than some of the truckers who stopped by for breakfast. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted his black coffee, but his gray eyes still carried the quiet discipline of a man who had once stared into the chaos of war. This diner, tucked off a lonely highway in rural Kansas, had been his refuge for years, until that morning. It began with a voice, young and mean. A man in his 30s was arguing with the waitress over his bill, slamming a fist against the counter as if a few dollars could buy him respect. Henry didn't mean to stare. He simply looked up, curious the way old men do when something loud breaks the calm. But the thug caught his gaze and mistook it for judgment. His pride, fragile, shallow, and starving for attention, snapped. Before anyone could react, the man strode across the floor and struck Henry across the face. The crack echoed through the diner, sharp and cruel. A coffee cup fell and shattered. The waitress gasped. The entire room went silent. Henry touched his cheek, stunned not by the pain but by the senselessness of it. For a long second he didn't move, just sat there, his weathered fingers trembling against his skin, eyes lowered to the dark swirl of his untouched coffee. He wasn't afraid. Fear was something he had long ago left behind on a battlefield halfway around the world. But something deep inside him ached, not for himself but for the world that could produce a man so small, so hollow, that he'd strike an old veteran over nothing. Around him, people avoided his gaze, their shame thick in the air. The waitress whispered apologies. Henry simply nodded, his silence heavier than any words he could have offered. The diner's clock ticked. The smell of burnt toast hung in the air. Henry stayed in that booth, not out of shock, but out of exhaustion. He had nowhere else to be, and as the minutes stretched on, he found himself wondering how decency could vanish so quietly from a place that once felt like home. Then the bell over the diner's door jingled. A gust of cold air swept through, followed by the sound of heavy boots and low voices. A group of bikers stepped inside, leather vests gleaming with patches of skulls and eagles. The customers shrank back instinctively, but Henry didn't move. His eyes, tired but unflinching, lifted just enough to meet the gaze of the man leading them, tall, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and eyes sharp as steel. Jake Callahan, Henry's estranged son. He hadn't seen him in almost 10 years, and in that fragile silence, something, memory, regret, blood, stirred between them. Jake's presence filled the diner like a storm rolling across an open plain, quiet for a moment but charged with an energy that made everyone's breath catch. His boots hit the floor in steady, deliberate rhythm as his crew fanned out behind him. Each of them wore the same patch on their back. Iron Hawks Motorcycle Club. The kind of men people avoided making eye contact with. But Jake's eyes, those cold, sharp blue eyes, were locked only on his father. He saw the bruise immediately. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl. Henry's lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. He had imagined this reunion 1,000 different ways, over a phone call maybe, or at a quiet table on some long summer afternoon, but never like this. Never with his cheek burning and the eyes of strangers watching. The waitress, still trembling, pointed toward the man at the counter. The thug had been laughing with a friend, but the sound died the moment Jake turned. The biker's stare pinned him to the spot like a hawk eyeing prey. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The diner had gone from quiet to silent to something beyond silence, a breath held by every soul in the room. Jake didn't rush. He walked slowly, each step a warning. His men followed, but not a word passed between them. The thug straightened, trying to sound brave. "You got a problem, old man?" Jake stopped, inches away. "That old man," he said evenly, "is my father, an 81-year-old Korean War veteran. He fought for the freedom you take for granted every time you open your mouth." The color drained from the thug's face. He swallowed hard, glancing at the others, but no one moved to help him. Jake's calm was more frightening than any threat. Henry finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Jake," he said softly, "don't." That single word, spoken not as a plea but as a reminder, seemed to hang in the air between them. Jake's jaw tightened. Years of unspoken resentment flashed across his expression, the weight of all their lost years pressing down. For so long, he had lived outside the world his father understood. Biker clubs, long roads, bar fights, a kind of freedom that had cost him family. Yet now, in the small-town diner where his father still ate breakfast alone, he was faced with the same lesson the old man had lived by his entire life. Real strength doesn't always need fists. Jake turned his gaze back to the thug. "Apologize," he said simply. The man hesitated. Jake's hand didn't move, but the tension in the air did. The bikers behind him didn't speak, didn't flinch, just stood there, radiating the kind of power that didn't need to prove itself. The thug finally stammered, I'm sorry, it wasn't much, but it was enough." Jake nodded once. "Good. Now leave." The man grabbed his jacket and bolted for the door. The bell jingled behind him, its cheerful sound absurd against the weight of the moment. Jake turned back to his father, eyes softer now. He slid into the booth across from him, resting a calloused hand over Henry's trembling one. For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them was filled with years of silence, but beneath it was something older, deeper, a bond that no distance, no anger could erase. Henry finally exhaled, voice rough as gravel. "You didn't have to do that." Jake gave a faint, tired smile. "Maybe not, but I wanted to." Outside, the sunlight had shifted, turning the diner's chrome edges to gold. Inside, the hum of life slowly returned. Whispers, coffee pouring, the clatter of plates. But at that booth in the corner, time seemed to move differently. Two men, bound by blood and the quiet pain of all they'd lost, sat together again for the first time in years. And for the first time in a very long while, Henry Callahan didn't feel alone. The hours that followed unfolded slowly, like a film reel playing at half speed. Jake stayed in that booth with his father, neither of them saying much, both unsure where to begin. The waitress, young, freckled, and still a little shaken, brought 2 fresh cups of coffee without a word. She set them down gently, as though afraid the moment might shatter if she moved too fast. Henry stared into his cup, watching the steam curl upward like ghostly threads of memory. "I didn't expect to see you again," he said finally. His voice carried no accusation, no anger, just weariness. Jake leaned back, his leather jacket creaking softly. "Yeah," he muttered, half a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Guess I didn't either." There was a pause. Outside, the low rumble of motorcycle engines idled like a heartbeat. The other bikers had taken seats along the counter, talking in hushed tones, keeping their distance but keeping watch. Every now and then, one of them glanced toward Henry, respectful, curious, uncertain what kind of man could raise someone like Jake Callahan. Henry broke the silence again, his gaze still fixed on the swirling coffee. "You look older," Jake chuckled under his breath. "So do you." The exchange was simple, but it cracked something open between them, an old rusted door finally giving way. Henry lifted his eyes, studying his son's face as if trying to memorize it. The gray streaks in Jake's beard, the scars along his knuckles, the lines carved deep by too many long roads and longer nights. He saw not the rebellious boy who had once stormed out of their home shouting about freedom, but a man tempered by the years, carrying his own ghosts quietly. "I always wondered where you went," Henry said softly. "After your mother passed, you just disappeared." Jake's eyes darkened, his tone low. "There wasn't anything left for me here, Dad. You were always distant." The house felt cold. "I thought maybe the road would fix that." Henry nodded, guilt threading through his silence. He had spent his younger years believing discipline could mend everything: grief, anger, loss. But the war had taught him control, not tenderness. And when his wife died, he built walls instead of bridges. Jake had been too much like him, stubborn, proud, unwilling to wait for an apology that never came. For years, Henry had replayed that night, Jake's motorcycle roaring down the street, his silhouette swallowed by darkness. He never chased after him, though he wanted to. Soldiers like him didn't chase. They waited. And in waiting, he had lost more than just his son. "I thought I was doing right by you," Henry said, his voice cracking under the weight of the truth. "But all I did was push you away." Jake didn't answer right away. He rubbed his thumb against the rim of his coffee cup, the tension in his shoulders slowly easing. "Maybe we both messed up," he admitted. "You were trying to survive your own way. I just didn't understand it back then." The clock above the counter ticked loudly, marking the fragile peace forming between them. Around the diner, customers began to relax again, some even smiling faintly as if witnessing something rare and sacred. Henry managed a small smile. "I used to sit here every morning thinking maybe you'd walk through that door one day." Jake glanced at him, his voice gentle now. "Guess I finally did." For a moment the past loosened its grip. Father and son sat in quiet companionship, the sun painting long shadows across the table. The bruise on Henry's cheek had already started to fade, replaced by something far more enduring. The warmth of reconciliation slowly taking root. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint echo of motorcycle engines down the road. Inside, amidst the soft clatter of dishes and the low hum of voices, Henry realized something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The following weeks transformed the diner into something far more than a roadside stop. Every morning at 8:15, Henry Callahan returned to his usual booth, but this time he wasn't alone. Jake often joined him, sometimes with a few of his biker brothers, sometimes by himself. The waitstaff grew used to the sight of their matching vests and rumbling bikes parked out front. At first, locals were wary, whispering about the gang of leather-clad men who'd taken over the old veteran's booth. But soon the fear gave way to curiosity, and curiosity turned into respect. Jake's crew treated Henry like family. They listened when he spoke, called him Mr. Callahan, and brought him small gifts: a new thermos, a patched cap, a faded American flag one of them had found at a flea market. For men who had lived rough lives, Henry became something steady, something they hadn't known they needed, a symbol of quiet strength. One afternoon, after most of the lunch crowd had gone, Jake and Henry lingered in their booth. Sunlight spilled through the windows, turning the chrome trim to molten gold. The jukebox played an old Johnny Cash song, the kind Henry used to hum while fixing the truck when Jake was a boy. "You ever think about those days?" Jake asked suddenly. Henry's lips curved in a faint smile. "Every day," Jake nodded, his eyes distant. "I used to hate this town, thought I had to get out to find something bigger. Turns out all I did was get lost." Henry looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw the boy he'd once carried on his shoulders through wheat fields, the boy who'd built toy planes and dreamed of flying. "Sometimes," Henry said quietly, "we have to lose ourselves before we realize where home is." For the first time, Jake didn't argue. He simply nodded, the truth settling deep inside him. Over time, the story of that morning spread through the small Kansas town. People spoke of the old veteran and the biker who stood up for him, not with fists but with loyalty. The locals began greeting Henry more warmly when he walked down Main Street, and Jake, once known as the town's black sheep, became something of a local legend. The diner even hung a framed photo of them at their corner booth, a reminder that respect and redemption could share the same table. One Sunday morning, a group of kids came in selling flags for Veterans Day. Henry smiled and bought a handful, passing them out to Jake's crew. The bikers laughed, tucking the small flags into their jackets as they rode off later that day, stars and stripes fluttering behind them in the wind. As the weeks turned into months, Henry found himself looking forward to those mornings more than anything else. The sound of the bell above the door, the scent of coffee, the deep rumble of engines pulling up outside, it all felt like life returning in full color. But beneath that peace, Henry also sensed time slipping quietly through his fingers. His hands grew slower, his breath shorter. He never complained, though Jake noticed. The son who once ran from his father's fragility now carried it gently, offering help without pride, patience without pity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the world in orange and violet, Henry spoke softly. "Jake, promise me you'll keep coming here." "Even when I can't," Jake frowned. "Don't talk like that." Henry's smile was thin, wistful. "It's just life, son. It doesn't last forever. But what we leave behind, that's what matters. You found your way home. That's enough for me." Jake looked down, his throat tightening. "You're not leaving yet," he said, though both of them knew the truth lingered unspoken between them. Outside, the motorcycles roared to life one by one, their echoes fading into the open country. Henry sat back watching his son through the window, a quiet pride glimmering in his eyes. After all the years of distance, he had his family back. And for a man who had seen war, loss, and loneliness, that was a victory worth more than any medal. Winter came quietly that year, wrapping the Kansas plains in sheets of gray and white. The diner, once filled with golden morning light, now glowed with the warmth of neon signs and the hiss of the coffee machine. Snow piled against the windows, and the bell above the door jingled softly as familiar faces came and went. Henry still sat in his booth each morning, though his movements had grown slower. His breath fogged faintly in the chill, and the waitress, now a friend rather than a stranger, always brought him his coffee before he even asked. Jake came every day now. No longer the drifting outlaw of the open road, he had built something steadier, a kind of peace he'd never known before. Sometimes he brought his club brothers with him, but more often he came alone, the thrum of his Harley fading into the stillness of dawn. He would sit across from his father talking about small things, the weather, the farm down the road, the latest diner gossip. But beneath those words ran a deeper rhythm, the unspoken gratitude of two men who had been given a second chance. Then one morning, the booth was empty. Henry didn't come. The waitress noticed first. She checked the clock, 8:20, and frowned. It wasn't like him to be late. By 9, Jake's motorcycle could be heard outside, the sound slicing through the cold air. When he stepped inside and saw the empty booth, something in his chest tightened. By noon, word spread. Henry Callahan had passed quietly in his sleep, his old flannel folded neatly on the chair beside his bed. On the nightstand lay his medals, a worn Bible, and a small note addressed to Jake. "Son, if you're reading this, it means I've gone home. Don't let grief weigh you down. Just live the way we finally learned to. Strong but kind. I'll be at the booth with you in spirit. Always proud, always watching." Jake sat in that booth for a long time after the funeral. The waitress left a cup of coffee across from him, untouched, steam curling into the air like a whisper. Around him, the diner was quiet except for the faint hum of a radio playing some old country tune Henry used to hum. The following Sunday, Jake returned, not just with his crew, but with dozens of others. Veterans, locals, strangers who had heard the story. They filled the diner, every seat taken, every heart heavy but full. The air buzzed with stories of Henry Callahan, his patience, his quiet humor, his unshakable decency. Jake stood near the counter, clearing his throat. "My old man didn't say much," he began, voice rough, "but when he did, it mattered. He taught me that strength isn't about how hard you hit. It's about how long you can stand with kindness when the world turns mean." A murmur of agreement swept through the room. From that day forward, the corner booth became known as the Callahan table. The diner staff kept it reserved, coffee poured, a folded flannel draped over the seat, a small plaque above it reading, "In honor of Henry Callahan, U.S. Army veteran, 1939-20 a man who fought battles abroad and won more at home to find his son again." People came from nearby towns just to see it. Some sat for a moment in silence. Others left small tokens, dog tags, folded notes, patches from old service uniforms, and every week Jake returned. He'd sit across from the empty seat, pour a second cup of coffee, and talk as if his father were still there. The waitress never charged him for that second cup. She said it was on the house for Henry. Before long, word of their story spread far beyond Kansas. Veterans and families across the country shared it, finding comfort in its quiet reminder that reconciliation isn't a miracle, it's a choice, made one conversation at a time. And so even years later, when someone new entered the diner and asked about the photo on the wall, the one of the old man and the biker sitting side by side, the waitress would smile and say, "That's Henry and Jake Callahan, a father and son who found their way back to each other right here, over black coffee and forgiveness." The story lingered like the scent of coffee in the air, warm, steady, and timeless. And somewhere, perhaps beyond the fields and beyond the years, Henry Callahan smiled. His battle was finally over. His family at last was home.